Were you there the day he died?
No, I was working at night. The night cook was off sick.
One night in August 1977, a maid who worked on the private floors in a Vegas hotel saw something that turned her ordinary life upside down completely. But she kept it to herself. Who was the calm, quietly dressed man she watched disappear through that service exit, and what made her stay silent for nearly 5 decades? The woman who kept quiet. The living room is small and neat, the kind of room that tells you everything about the person who lives in it. Modest furniture arranged with quiet care, a few photographs on the wall, a cup of tea going cold on the side table. The kind of room where ordinary life has been lived for a very long time, where decades have passed slowly and without drama, or at least that is how it looks from the outside. She is 87 years old, this woman, and she sits in her chair with the particular stillness of someone who has learned over a very long life that stillness is its own kind of power, that the people who stay quiet and watch carefully always end up knowing more than the people who talk. And she has known a great deal for a very long time, has carried it through almost 50 years of ordinary days, ordinary mornings, ordinary nights. The secret sitting inside her chest like a stone that never got lighter, no matter how many years passed over it. Her hands are wrinkled and her hair is white, and the skin around her eyes has the soft, papery look of great age. But her eyes themselves are something else entirely, sharp and clear and steady. The eyes of a woman whose memory has not blurred the way bodies do, whose recollection of one particular night in August 1977 is as precise and detailed as if it happened last week, as if time did the strange thing it sometimes does with moments that matter, preserving them perfectly while everything around them fades. She had not planned to speak, not now, not ever really. The decision had been made so long ago and held so firmly for so many decades that silence had become simply a part of who she was, woven into the fabric of her daily life, the way certain experiences weave themselves into a person, until you cannot separate the experience from the person anymore, until the secret and the woman keeping it have become the same thing. But something shifted, she says. Something that happens to people when they reach the far end of a long life and begin to look back more than forward, when the fear of consequences starts to feel smaller than the weight of an unspoken truth, when the question of what you will leave behind begins to matter more than the question of what you will lose by speaking. And so, she leans toward the interviewer, this 87-year-old woman with her sharp eyes and her cold tea and her 50 years of carefully kept silence. And she says the words she has never said out loud to anyone except one person, one time, a very long time ago. She says that she cleaned his suite and she saw him leave, but not the way they said he left, not the way the whole world was told, not through the front of the story that became official and permanent and sealed, but through the back, through the part of the story that nobody was supposed to see, and the part that nobody until now has ever been told. The King of Las Vegas. To understand what she saw and why it matters, you have to understand what Elvis Presley meant to Las Vegas in the 1970s. Because it was not simply the relationship between a performer and a city, it was something more intertwined than that. Something more mutually dependent. Something that had transformed both the man and the place in ways that neither could have predicted when it began. Las Vegas in those years was a city that ran on spectacle, that had built its entire identity around the idea that ordinary life could be left at the door, that inside its glittering borders the rules were different and the lights never went out, and anything was possible if you were willing to pay for it. And Elvis fit into that world the way a key fits into a lock that was made specifically for it. His excess and his grandeur, and his almost supernatural ability to fill a room with something that felt larger than entertainment, felt closer to experience, felt like something you would tell people about for the rest of your life. The International Hotel, which would later become the Las Vegas Hilton, had brought Elvis back to live performance in 1969 after nearly a decade away from the stage. And what happened in that showroom over the years that followed was the stuff of legend. Shows that people flew in from across the country and across the world to see. Nights where the energy between the stage and the audience was so electric and so alive that people who were there still struggle to describe it accurately, still reach for words that are never quite big enough for what they experienced. But the Las Vegas that existed behind the showrooms and the marquees and the lobby chandeliers was a different place entirely. A place of narrow service corridors and back staircases and private elevators and carefully managed invisibility. A place where the machinery that created the spectacle lived and moved and operated in deliberate obscurity. And the people who worked in that hidden Las Vegas, the maids and the porters and the kitchen staff and the security workers, saw things that the people in the front of the building never saw. Knew things that the official version of events never included. She was one of those people, this quiet, observant woman who is now 87 years old and sitting in her neat living room in Nevada. And in the summer of 1977, she was 38 years old and working the private floors of the International Hotel. And she was very good at her job precisely because she understood the first rule of working in those corridors, which was that you saw everything and you said nothing. A rule she kept faithfully for nearly 5 decades until now. The maid assigned to the king. She had worked at the International Hotel for several years before 1977. Had learned its rhythms and its rituals, had memorized the particular personality of each floor, the way the private corridors had a heavier and more deliberate quiet to them, the kind of quiet that is maintained rather than natural, the kind that requires effort and intention from every single person who moves through it. And she had become, over those years, exactly the kind of person that those corridors required. Being assigned to the celebrity suites was a quiet acknowledgement from management that you were trustworthy and discreet, that you understood the particular demands of cleaning the rooms of the hotel's most valuable guests. And she had earned that assignment through years of showing up, doing the work carefully, keeping her eyes down and her mouth closed and her observations entirely to herself, which was exactly the kind of reliability that the private floors of a hotel like this one required above everything else. Elvis was on those floors often, and she had developed a quiet familiarity with the patterns of his presence, the way his suite felt busier and more alive than other suites even in its empty moments. The rotating cast of security staff and entourage members, whose faces she came to know the way you know the furniture in a room you clean every single day. And he was polite to her, genuinely polite, the kind of politeness that comes from somewhere real rather than from habit or performance. But in the final weeks before August 1977, something around his suite began to shift. And the first thing she noticed was the bags, packed luggage sitting in the corner day after day without being moved, as if a departure had been decided, but the moment had not yet arrived. And then the unfamiliar men appeared, new faces in suits she had never seen before, moving through those private floors with a quiet, purposeful authority that felt different from the regular security staff she had always known. The phone calls were the third thing, hushed and urgent behind closed doors, more frequent than anything she had heard before on those floors. Conversations that felt like something specific was being arranged or finalized. And the combination of all three things together, the waiting bags and the strange men and the urgent whispered calls, settled into her awareness like the pieces of a picture she could not yet fully see, but whose outline, slowly and with growing unease, she was beginning to make out. The night everything felt different. There are ordinary nights, and then there are nights that announce themselves differently. And the late August night in 1977 that she describes was the second kind. The kind she knew even as she was living. It would stay with her forever, would resist the softening that time usually does to memory, and remain sharp and precise no matter how many decades were stacked carefully on top of it, no matter how many ordinary days tried to bury it under their comfortable weight. She arrived for her shift the way she always did, moving through the staff entrance and along the service corridors with the quiet efficiency of someone whose body knows the route so well it barely needs the mind's involvement. And for the first part of the shift, everything felt ordinary enough. Just the familiar work of the private floors, until the atmosphere around her began to change in ways she felt before she understood. Something tightening in the air, something different in the way the security staff were positioned and moving. Staff were being sent home earlier than usual, quiet reassignments and early dismissals that reduced the number of people on the floors with a deliberateness she recognized, and when her supervisor told her not to return to the main hallway for the rest of her shift. The instruction came wrapped in casualness, the way important things sometimes are, delivered lightly so that it does not feel like what it actually is. which is a door being closed on something that someone does not want witnessed. She accepted it quietly the way she accepted everything, but something in her, that careful, observant part that had always made her good at this work, told her this instruction was a piece of the larger picture she had been assembling for weeks. And so she did what the instruction told her not to do, not out of defiance but out of instinct, turning back toward the main hallway on soft, quiet shoes, breathing steadily, her face arranged in the neutral expression of a woman simply going about her work. And what she saw when she rounded that corner was the thing she has been carrying inside her for nearly 50 years. The service elevator. She is careful when she describes this moment, careful in the way of someone who has turned a memory over in private for decades and wants to get every detail exactly right now that she has finally decided to speak. Careful in the way of a witness who understands that precision is everything, that the difference between being believed and being dismissed comes down entirely to the steadiness and the specificity of what you are able to recall without flinching, without embellishing, without reaching for drama that the plain facts do not need. He was alone. And that was the first thing that struck her, because Elvis was almost never alone in those corridors, almost never anywhere without the familiar human buffer of security and entourage that had become as much a part of his presence as his voice. And yet there he was outside the service elevator, without a single recognizable face beside him, without the usual architecture of people that surrounded him everywhere he went. Just a man standing in a corridor, waiting. He was not wearing anything she associated with him. No jeweled jumpsuit, no stage clothes, nothing that belonged to the public version of Elvis Presley. Just a plain dark jacket over ordinary clothes. The kind of outfit designed to move through a space without attracting attention, without triggering recognition. And there were no sunglasses either, which she noted carefully because Elvis almost always wore them in corridors like this one, and their absence felt significant, felt like another detail pointing in the same direction as everything else. Beside him stood two men she had never seen before, not regular security, not entourage. Two unfamiliar men with that same quiet, purposeful authority she had noticed in the weeks leading up to this night. And the three of them stood together near the service elevator with a stillness that felt composed rather than anxious. The stillness of people waiting for something that has been arranged and planned and agreed upon. The stillness of a departure that is not accidental, but entirely deliberate. And she stood at the end of the corridor and watched without moving, barely breathing, understanding instinctively that she was not meant to be there. The exit. No one talks about. Most guests who stay in a large hotel have no idea that behind its carpeted corridors and polished surfaces, there exists an entirely separate world. A network of narrow service hallways and freight elevators and back staircases that run through the building like hidden veins, existing specifically so that the machinery of the hotel can operate invisibly, so that the laundry and the deliveries and the quiet management of difficult situations can all be handled without ever disturbing the carefully maintained illusion of the public-facing floors. She knew those hidden corridors the way she knew her own home, had walked them thousands of times, knew every turn and every junction and every door, knew which hallways led to the laundry and which ones ran past the kitchen, and which ones opened eventually onto the service exits at the back of the building. The exits that faced not the glittering strip, but the ordinary, unremarkable back end of the hotel, the loading areas and the delivery bays, and the plain streets that guests were never meant to see. She watched Elvis step away from the carpeted public corridor and into the narrow service hallway, the two men moving with him in the practiced formation of people who have done this before, one slightly ahead and one slightly behind, moving together with the quiet efficiency of a plan being executed smoothly. And what struck her most powerfully as she watched was not what she saw, but what she did not see. She did not see weakness or exhaustion, or the physical heaviness that accounts of his declining health had so consistently described. He looked calm, she says, using that word carefully, because calm is not resigned and not defeated, and not the surrender of a man who has run out of road. Calm is the word for someone who has made a decision and arrived at peace with it. And that quality of calm was something she could not reconcile with the news that reached her days later. And then the service exit door opened and closed behind all three of them with a quiet, definitive sound. And the corridor was empty, and she stood alone in the silence with something she would carry for the next 50 years. The morning after. The news reached her the way news always reached the staff of the International Hotel, not through any official announcement, but through the corridors themselves, through the whispered conversations between colleagues and the hushed exchanges at shift changes, and the particular electricity that moves through a building, when something enormous has happened and everyone knows it, but nobody is quite sure yet what they are allowed to say out loud. And when the words finally formed themselves clearly enough to understand, she stood very still and listened and felt the floor shift beneath her. Elvis Presley was dead. That was what they were saying. Dead at Graceland in Memphis, Tennessee. Found on the bathroom floor on the morning of August 16, 1977. And the city of Las Vegas was processing the information the way it processed everything. Loudly and publicly, and with the particular intensity of a place that had built so much of its identity around the man whose name had been on its marquees for nearly a decade. And the grief that moved through the strip that day was real and enormous and impossible to contain. She stood in the middle of all of it and felt something that was not grief exactly, or not only grief, but something more complicated and more unsettling, because she was holding in her memory a picture that did not fit the story being told. A picture of a man in a plain dark jacket standing calm and purposeful near a service elevator in the early hours of an August morning. A man who did not look like someone approaching the end of anything. A man who looked like someone at the beginning of something. And that picture and this news were two things that her mind could not place in the same version of reality, no matter how hard she tried. She thought about the jacket. She thought about the two unfamiliar men. She thought about the way the service exit door had swung closed with that quiet, definitive sound. And she thought about the timeline, because if Elvis had been found at Graceland in Memphis on the morning of August 16th, then the geography alone raised a question she could not answer, could not explain away, could not fold into the official story, no matter how many times she turned it over. How could a man be found dead in Tennessee if she had watched him walk through a service exit in Nevada? And that question, simple and stubborn and impossible, was the stone that dropped into the center of her life that day and sent ripples outward through every year that followed. The silence and the fear. She told one person, just one, told them carefully and quietly, choosing her words the way you choose your steps when you are walking on uncertain ground, not wanting to make more of it than it was, but not being able to pretend it was nothing, because it was not nothing. It was something she had seen with her own eyes, something her memory held with a clarity that no amount of official storytelling could soften or dissolve, and the person she told was her direct supervisor, a woman she had worked alongside for years and trusted in the way you trust the people whose reliability you have tested and found solid. The response she received was not what she had hoped for. It was not curiosity or concern, or even a simple acknowledgement that what she was describing was worth paying attention to. It was something much flatter and much colder than any of those things. It was two words delivered without expression, without warmth, without any of the human texture that the moment seemed to require. And those two words were "forget it." And the way they were delivered told her everything she needed to know about the conversation she had just made the mistake of starting. Within days, she was reassigned to a different floor, moved away from the private celebrity suites she had worked for years, moved without explanation or discussion, in the way that things are done in large organizations when someone needs to be repositioned without the repositioning looking like what it is. And she understood the message of the reassignment, the way she had understood the message of every other piece of this situation, quietly and completely, and without requiring anyone to spell it out for her. Then the man came to her apartment. And this is the part of the story that pushed her from discomfort into genuine fear. Because a stranger arriving at your home to ask gentle questions about what you remember is not a neutral event. It's not something you can interpret as coincidence or routine. She interpreted it as a message delivered in person, in her own space, in the place where she was supposed to be safe. And the questions he asked were polite and unhurried, and wrapped in the kind of friendliness that made them more frightening rather than less. Because frightening things that wear friendly faces are always more frightening than frightening things that look like what they are. After that, she stopped talking, completely and deliberately, building a wall of silence around what she had seen and mortaring it with the particular fear of a woman who was alone and working and responsible for a child, and who has been shown, clearly enough, that the thing she witnessed in that corridor is something that powerful people would prefer to remain unseen. And she kept that wall standing for the next 47 years, kept it through every documentary she watched and every rumor she heard, and every quiet private moment when the memory of that August night came back to her as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. Decades of sightings. Over the years that followed, the rumors never stopped. They simply changed shapes, evolved and multiplied, and spread through the culture the way certain stories do when they touch something deep enough in the collective imagination, when they speak to a longing or a doubt or a question that ordinary people carry without fully knowing they carry it. And the question at the center of all of them was always the same, always the one that had no satisfying answer, always the one that kept circling back, regardless of how many times it was addressed or dismissed or explained away. People saw him, that was what they said. Ordinary people in ordinary places, a gas station in Mississippi, an airport in California, a diner in Tennessee, a grocery store in Alabama. People who had no particular reason to lie and no particular agenda to serve, and who simply looked up from whatever they were doing and saw a face that stopped them cold. A face that was older than the face they remembered from the photographs and the album covers, but was unmistakably, undeniably the same face. And the experience left them shaken in the particular way that impossible things leave you shaken, not dramatically, but quietly, persistently, in the back of the mind where certainty is supposed to live. She followed these stories from a distance, watching the documentaries and reading the occasional article, and listening when the subject came up in conversation around her. Always from behind the wall of her silence, never contributing what she knew, never adding her piece to the puzzle that other people were trying to assemble without all the pieces. And each time someone described a possible escape plan, each time a researcher or a journalist laid out the theory of a staged death and a secret departure, she felt something move in her chest, felt the memory of the service elevator, and the plain dark jacket and the calm, unhurried face pressed itself forward in her mind with renewed insistence. She never went to the press, never contacted a journalist, never responded to the various calls over the decades for people with information to come forward, because the man at her apartment had not needed to be explicit for her to understand what coming forward might cost. And she had a life to protect and a child to raise. And the silence was easier than the alternative. Right up until the moment, at 87 years old, in a modest living room in Nevada, when it suddenly was not easier anymore, when the weight of what she had kept finally became heavier than the weight of what she had feared. Why tell the story now? At 87 years old, she says she has nothing left to lose, and she says it not dramatically, not with the weight of someone making a grand statement, but simply and quietly, the way people state things that are just true, the way facts sound when they have been lived rather than constructed. And the fact she is stating is that the calculation she made at 38 years old in a reassigned hotel room with a stranger's visit still fresh in her memory are calculations that no longer apply to the person she is now. Sitting in this small, neat living room at the end of a long and carefully lived life. She does not want fame, she says this clearly, does not want the attention or the controversy or the complicated aftermath that she knows will follow these words once they leave this room and enter the world. She has spent nearly 50 years being invisible, and she has no particular desire to become visible now. What she wants is simply to say what she saw, to add her piece to the record, to let the truth of one ordinary woman's ordinary observation sit alongside all the other pieces of this story and be evaluated by whoever is doing the evaluating. Was it really Elvis she saw that night? She cannot say with the absolute certainty that she would need to say it definitively. She can only say what her eyes showed her. A man whose face she had seen many times over the years she had worked those floors. A man she recognized in the way you recognize someone you have seen regularly even when they are dressed differently and moving quietly and doing everything possible not to be recognized. And what she recognized was not a performance or an approximation, but the real and specific presence of a particular human being she had known, at a distance and in passing, for several years. And she ends her interview with the sentence that she has been carrying inside her for longer than most people carry anything. The sentence that formed itself in her mind in the empty service corridor on that August night and never left. That a man moving toward a secret exit with calm eyes and a plain jacket and two quiet strangers beside him did not look like a man about to die. He looked like a man about to leave. The story of what one quiet hotel maid saw on that August night in 1977 may never be proven or disproven. The service exit door swung closed and the truth walked out with it. But what she carried alone for nearly 50 years feels too specific and too steady to simply dismiss. And whether Elvis walked away, or whether grief makes people see what they need to see, one thing is certain: some doors once opened can never be closed again.